Welcome to Bookpods. Imagine an alien anthropologist landing on Earth and just trying to figure out how a relatively weak, hairless ape managed to, pave over the planet.
Right, and split the atom.
Yeah, split the atom, build these massive global networks. If you were looking for a single sweeping narrative to just hand to that alien, you'd probably hand them Yuval Noah Harari's massively popular book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is a total cultural phenomenon at this point. But, whenever a book attempts to condense the entirety of the human story into like 450 pages, that sweeping narrative is going to cause some friction.
Definitely. And to build our understanding of it for this deep dive today, we're pulling from a really fascinating stack of material.
We're looking at 3 distinct YouTube reviews, actually.
Yeah, so we have a general big picture summary outlining the core ideas, a really grounded perspective from a UCLA anthropology student, and then a highly critical, like line-by-line teardown by an evolutionary anthropologist.
Which is a great mix.
It really is, because the mission for our deep dive today is to figure out this paradox. We want to explore how this book became a universal bestseller. I mean, recommended by people like Barack Obama and Bill Gates, while simultaneously driving actual scientists and anthropologists a little crazy.
Just a little bit crazy, yeah.
Right. And to figure out why it resonates so deeply, we really have to start with the grand framework that Harari builds.
Right. So he structures human history around 3 massive inflection points. First, you have the cognitive revolution, which happened roughly 70,000 years ago.
Okay.
Then the agricultural revolution, about 10,000 years ago. And finally, the scientific revolution, which kicked off just like 500 years ago.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the cognitive revolution, because this is where Harari introduces his most famous and, honestly, most sticky concept.
The fictive language.
Yes, fictive language. He argues that humans rule the world not because we have opposable thumbs or, can make tools, but simply because we can believe in things that only exist in our imaginations.
Yeah, he calls it the imagined order. And the mechanism behind this is, well, it's what completely changed the trajectory of our species.
How so?
Well, before this cognitive leap, prehistoric humans were relatively insignificant. The summary reviewer we looked at points out Harari's comparison, which is that early humans had no more impact on their environment than like gorillas, fireflies, or jellyfish.
Wow, fireflies.
Yeah, I mean, we existed strictly within the physical boundaries of the natural world.
It's such a wild concept when you really try to visualize it. He's saying that things like money, human rights, and corporations, they don't exist in the physical universe.
Right, they are collective imaginations.
Exactly. It makes me think of the rules of a game like football.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, like you look at a stadium with 80,000 screaming fans down on the field, there are sidelines, end zones, and the concept of a touchdown.
But none of that is real in nature.
Right, it's just chalk dust on grass. You won't find a penalty flag growing on an oak tree anywhere.
Definitely not.
But the game only works, right? The entire multi-billion-dollar system only functions because every single person on the field and in the stands collectively agrees to believe in those made-up rules.
That is the perfect way to look at it. And when you scale that shared belief up from a football stadium to an entire civilization, you get immense physical power.
Because everyone is playing by the same rules?
Exactly. In the animal kingdom, cooperation is usually limited by intimacy. Like a chimpanzee can only coordinate with a troop of maybe 50 others.
Because they have to actually know them.
Right, they need to physically know and trust every single member. But the moment humans could rally millions of total strangers around a shared fiction, whether that's the belief in a specific deity or the authority of a nation-state or even just the value of a piece of paper we call a dollar bill, we bypass those biological limits.
It's just incredible.
It is. The imagined order is basically the engine of mass cooperation.
It's an incredibly elegant theory, and I mean, you can see why readers fall in love with the book. But here is where we transition from brilliant storytelling into the major flaw that structural elegance creates.
Yeah, the friction we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Because what happens when a historian tries to explain evolutionary biology using those same simplified storybook narratives?
You get some very, very frustrated scientists.
Oh, yeah.
The evolutionary anthropologist we're using as a source highlights a highly controversial claim very early in the book. Harari writes that 6 million years ago, a single female ape had 2 daughters.
Right, I remember this part.
Yeah, and he says one became the ancestor of all chimpanzees, and the other became our own grandmother.
I mean, as a reader just sitting on my couch, I get why he did that. It's a great visual.
Mhm.
I can close my eyes and picture these two apes taking different paths in the jungle.
Sure, it paints a picture.
But I have to ask, isn't it necessary to water down complex science so a general audience can actually digest it? Like if he went into the granular mathematical details of genetic mutation over millions of years, wouldn't he lose the reader entirely?
Well, this raises an important question about the line between making science accessible and fueling permanent public misconceptions.
Okay, fair point.
The anthropologist points out that this specific phrasing is incredibly damaging because it fundamentally confuses macroevolution with microevolution.
Let me see if I follow the biologist's critique here. Is the issue that macroevolution isn't like a sudden generational leap?
Exactly.
Because the phrasing makes it sound like a chimpanzee suddenly gave birth to a human, which feeds directly into those old terrible arguments of, if humans evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys?
That is the exact problem. Evolution is a slow, gradual divergence of allele frequencies over hundreds of thousands of years.
Right.
Think of it like a language evolving. Latin didn't turn into Italian overnight because a mother spoke Latin and her 2 daughters suddenly started speaking fluent Italian and French.
Right, that would be ridiculous.
It was an imperceptible generational drift. It would be completely accurate to say humans and chimps shared a common ancestor and slowly diverged. But boiling it down to one ape, having 2 daughters who split the species, that completely misrepresents the mechanics of natural selection.
And reading through the sources, that's not the only biological claim that raises eyebrows.
Not at all.
The anthropologist highlights several unsourced theories that the book presents as settled fact. For example, Harari claims that early humans essentially traded muscle mass for bigger brains.
Which is quite a leap.
Yeah, his argument is that our muscles atrophied because we were spending so much time running around looking for extra food to power our expanding neurons.
Which ignores the much more widely accepted mechanics of how our brains actually grew.
All right. The biological reviewer points out the expensive tissue hypothesis.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
The brain is a massive energy hog, but so is our digestive tract. The prevailing scientific theory is that once early humans started cooking food, they were essentially pre-digesting it.
Making it easier to process.
Exactly. That meant we didn't need massive, energy-intensive intestines anymore. The shrinking of our gut is what freed up the metabolic calories needed to power a larger brain. It had nothing to do with our biceps atrophying because we were distracted by looking for berries.
Yeah, and we also see this oversimplification in his explanation of language. Harari posits that human language evolved almost purely so we could gossip about each other.
Which is funny, but...
Right, he says it was so we could figure out who was reliable and who was a cheat within our social groups.
And while gossip is certainly a fun idea, the evolutionary anthropologist notes that boiling the evolution of language down to a single variable is incredibly reductive.
Very much so.
Language development involved complex mechanics surrounding hunting coordination, tool-making instruction, navigating intricate environments. Reducing it to, we wanted to gossip, relies on a single source and ignores decades of linguistic research.
So when we look at this pattern in the early chapters, a clear theme emerges. When the granular, complex mechanics of biological science get in the way of a compelling, sweeping narrative, the narrative wins.
It usually does in popular books.
But as we move out of biology and into the author's actual wheelhouse history and economics, the foundation of the book shifts.
This is where all 3 sources, even the highly critical ones, agree the book really finds its footing. The chapters explaining how economics shaped the modern world are apparently fantastic.
They are very strong.
He breaks down the crucial mechanism of capitalism by contrasting it with simple wealth. Wealth is what a pirate has.
Like a treasure chest.
Exactly. You steal a bunch of gold, you lock it in a treasure chest, and you sit on it. The pie is finite.
Capitalism, on the other hand, operates on the belief that the pie can grow. It is the active reinvestment of those earnings into production.
So you don't just sit on the money.
Right. You don't hoard the gold. You use it to build a factory, fund a trade expedition, or hire more labor, which creates even more wealth to reinvest.
The historical examples the reviewers highlight here are fascinating because they show how this shift in mindset completely rewrote the geopolitical map.
It changed everything.
It wasn't just kings conquering lands with swords anymore, it was joint stock companies and credit. Harari talks about how the London Stock Exchange essentially financed the Greeks against the Ottoman Empire.
Which is wild to think about.
Right. He goes deep into how the Dutch built a global empire not through massive armies, but through credit.
The mechanism there is crucial. The Dutch understood that if you reliably pay back loans with interest, you build immense trust.
And trust is everything in banking.
Exactly. The trust functions like a time machine. It allows you to pull wealth from the future into the present to build a fleet of ships today.
And he contrasts that directly with the Spanish. The Spanish were busy plundering finite physical silver from the Americas.
The pirate wealth approach.
Exactly. But because they defaulted on their debts and relied on extraction rather than reinvestment, those very same Dutch loans ended up crippling the Spanish Empire. It's a brilliant way of looking at global history entirely through the lens of a ledger book.
It is brilliant. However, our sources note that a historian's lens is never entirely objective, and Harari's cultural biases become highly visible in the later half of the book,
Oh, definitely.
particularly when it comes to religion.
Right. If you consider religion to just be another part of the imagined order, like corporate law, it sets up a very specific worldview.
It does.
According to both the student review and the summary, Harari presents a heavy anti-religion bias. He posits that religion is not just a shared fiction, but one that actively hindered progress.
Which is a bold claim.
He specifically claims that Christianity stifled scientific exploration in medieval Europe, arguing that discovering something new about spiders, or Galapagos finches, was deemed trivial by the church because it didn't serve the eternal truths of society.
But the evolutionary anthropologist's review provides direct historical counter-evidence to this framing. They impartially point out that the historical record shows many of history's greatest scientific minds were, in fact, devoutly religious.
Oh, absolutely.
And their scientific pursuits were driven by, rather than hindered by, their faith. They viewed studying the natural world as a way to understand the Creator's work.
The examples the reviewer pulls are pretty undeniable, too. Gregor Mendel, the guy who essentially discovered modern genetics through his work with pea plants, was an Augustinian friar.
Right.
Michael Faraday, who revolutionized our understanding of electromagnetism, was deeply involved in his church. And Isaac Newton, one of the most foundational figures in physics, wrote more about theology than he ever did about science.
Yeah, that's a huge point.
Framing religion purely as an obstacle to science ignores the historical reality of who was actually doing the science.
And this brings us to another massive blind spot the anthropologist identifies. For a book proudly titled A Brief History of Humankind, the narrative is astonishingly Eurocentric.
Astonishingly. I was reading the list of omissions the anthropologist compiled, and it is staggering.
It really is.
Harari dedicates an entire section to the evolution of how humans measure time and completely leaves out the Mayan calendar, which was one of the most sophisticated timekeeping systems in human history.
It creates a skewed reality. When a reader consumes this, they are led to believe that the march of progress is a purely Western phenomenon.
He dedicates a whole section to mathematics and the development of numbers to manage those economic ledgers we talked about. But he doesn't mention the Arabic and Indian invention of the numerical system or the concept of zero.
Which is foundational.
You literally cannot have modern mathematics, science, or capitalism without the concept of zero. And then he talks about global trade and its impact on empires, but entirely skips over the Chinese silk trade.
These omissions highlight a critical flaw in how we consume popular history. We assume a sweeping universal title implies a global objective perspective.
But it doesn't.
No, every writer is constrained by their own cultural lens, and they curate historical facts to fit the specific philosophical point they are trying to make.
Which brings us perfectly to perhaps the most provocative philosophical point in the entire book. It is a concept that forces you to completely reevaluate the cereal you eat for breakfast.
Yeah, this part is really something.
It's his take on the agricultural revolution, which he calls history's biggest fraud.
It is a total inversion of how we are conventionally taught history. From grade school onward, we are taught that farming was our salvation. It civilized us and pulled us out of the harsh, primitive wilderness.
But Harari argues the exact opposite. He says we didn't domesticate wheat. Wheat domesticated us.
Which is such a mind-bending way to say it.
It is. Think about the mechanics of early farming. We traded the varied, interesting life of a hunter-gatherer who maybe worked 20 hours a week foraging nuts, berries, and occasional meat for back-breaking labor.
Right, from dawn to dusk.
Early humans spent their days pulling weeds under a burning sun, carrying water, and getting slip discs in their backs, all to cultivate a single crop. Our diets became significantly less nutritious, and we became entirely vulnerable to famine if that one crop failed.
And that transition set the stage for what Harari considers one of the worst crimes in history, which is the cruelty of factory farming.
Yeah.
By viewing animals no longer as fellow creatures sharing an ecosystem, but as cogs in an agricultural machine, we began breeding them purely to produce milk or meat, separating mothers from calves and completely divorcing ourselves from the natural world.
It is an incredibly sobering perspective, but here's where it gets really interesting, because the anthropologist's review provides the necessary counter-argument to this grim view of agriculture.
Right, there's another side to it.
Yes, early farming brought terrible new hardships and diseases, but it also created the one thing hunter-gatherers never had, which was a massive surplus of calories.
And the mechanism of a calorie surplus is what builds civilization.
Exactly. If you are a hunter-gatherer, everyone in your tribe has to be involved in getting food. But if one farmer can produce enough wheat to feed 10 people, those other 9 people no longer have to spend their days looking for berries.
They are freed up.
That surplus leads to the diversification of labor. Those 9 people can now become architects, engineers, blacksmiths, and scientists. The misery of early agriculture is the direct mechanism that led to public infrastructure, written language, and eventually the very modern comforts that allow us to sit in a climate-controlled room today and debate the merits of agriculture.
It is a profound trade-off. We sacrificed individual health and leisure in the short term for the exponential advancement of the species in the long term.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
And that concept of trade-offs leads perfectly into Harari's ultimate concluding theme, the pursuit of happiness. Because of all these massive revolutions, cognitive, agricultural, scientific, didn't necessarily make the average human happier. What actually does?
The sources show that the book dives deep into the relationship between modern capitalism, money, and human happiness. And the data is pretty clear on how this mechanism works. Money absolutely does increase happiness, but only up to a very specific threshold.
Right, the survival threshold.
It makes a massive difference when it lifts people out of poverty because it eliminates the acute, tangible problems that cause misery, hunger, lack of shelter, untreated illness.
But once those baseline survival needs are met, the mechanism stops working.
Right.
Having $1 billion doesn't make you exponentially happier than having a stable middle-class income. You simply adapt to your new normal.
Right, the hedonic treadmill. You buy the new car, you feel a spike of joy, and 2 weeks later, it's just the car you drive to work. You're constantly chasing the next euphoric high and trying desperately to avoid the lows.
Harari connects this inherent limitation of modern consumerism to Buddhist philosophy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, according to the concepts explored in the book, true peace doesn't come from successfully acquiring everything you desire. It comes from stepping off the hedonic treadmill entirely.
It's opting out.
Exactly. It is the profound acceptance that life is a continuous cycle of suffering and joy. Happiness is found in experiencing those feelings without constantly craving the next high or fleeing the next low.
It's a profound shift in perspective, especially sitting at the end of a 450-page history of human ambition. So what does this all mean when we step back and look at the big picture?
Good question.
When we synthesize all 3 of our sources, the awestruck summary, the exhausted anthropology student, and the frustrated evolutionary biologist, we see the distinct dual nature of Sapiens. On one hand, it is a beautifully written, highly conversational philosophical meditation. It forces you to question the very foundations of how you live your life.
But on the other hand, it is exactly that, a philosophical meditation, not an infallible, objective textbook. As a reader, you have to keep your critical thinking engaged. Always. You have to recognize the Eurocentric blind spots that leave out massive chunks of human achievement, and you have to be wary of how it oversimplifies complex biological evolution just to serve a neat, tidy narrative. It's why the ratings in our sources range anywhere from a hesitant 2.5 to a solid 4 out of 5 stars. It just depends entirely on what you expect to get out of it.
It's a book that demands to be read, but it equally demands to be questioned. Which brings us back to where we started. If history isn't just a stable foundation of absolute facts, but a narrative built on the fictions we collectively agree to believe in, we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Harari argues that everything from human rights to corporations to international borders to the value of the money in your bank account is just part of the imagined order, a shared myth we all currently agree to believe in to keep modern society functioning.
So look around your life today. What deeply held, fundamental belief of your daily reality will historians 1,000 years from now look back on as just another temporary myth?